Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to this webinar series. Can we please have the slides projected? Okay, thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Emmanuel Chapel COVID-19 talk series. This is the 8th edition, and it's tagged The State of the Future. And the narrative under that is starting and restarting your business, staying relevant and sustainable through economic cycles. So I just want to welcome everyone again, and we'll go through the agenda now. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll start with a short icebreaker, and then we'll go into a bit of a background, which I'll talk through for a few minutes before we go around each of the panelists, just speaking to some of the insights that I will share. And then we go into some sort of roundtable guided discussion before questions and answers at the end, and then we wrap up. Okay, so next slide, please. I'm going to just introduce our panelists. I'll start with Aisha Bashir. She's a founder and CEO of Cam Dairies, a Nigerian dairy company that is working to provide families with non-diluted real dairy products sourced from pastoralist communities in Nigeria to reach self-sufficiency in dairy production and other agricultural commodities, and also to drive the development of value-added products to meet the needs of Nigerian consumers. Our next panelist is Dr. Hamed Ninalowo. He's a physician who is a vascular and interventional radiologist, a virgin specialty in Nigeria, where we use minimally invasive means to treat diseases. And he's the first to provide a comprehensive service in Nigeria. He emigrated back to Nigeria just over the last few years, so it'll be interesting to hear his experience as well. Our third panelist is Mrs. Rolake Akinkugbe-Filani. She's an energy and finance executive and has been financing and helping to successfully scale energy and infrastructure businesses for the past 12 years. She consults for the energy sector via EnergyInc advisors. She's also a senior advisor to the IFU Danish Investment Fund. She supports alternative energy SMEs via her non-profit social enterprise, Inotide. She's also the UK Women Energy Council Top 275 Global Female Executive Influencers. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Ayodele Olajida. He's the CEO of Food Pro Limited, a retail company that produces cashew snacks, namely Lion cashews and Go nuts. He has a unique blend of work experience ranging from his work in technology, management consulting, telecoms, mining, FMCG, logistics, and banking to his investment banking background, which includes establishing Rand Merchant Bank in Nigeria and his current work in agri-processing and the FMCG space. He is also a member of the Board of Trustees of Teach for Nigeria. And finally, I am Aramide Abe. I'm the founder of Naija Startups, and it's a pleasure to be here. I will be moderating today's session, and I want to say thank you to Emmanuel Chapel for giving us this opportunity and platform to dialogue and speak to the state of the future. So without further ado, we'll go into a short icebreaker. Can I ask our attendees to type in their chat box how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted their businesses? One being not really, maybe barely, nothing, and then 5 being severely. So it'll be good to hear from you. Just type in the figure in the chat box as to how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted your business. Again, I say, so 5 would be extremely, that's severe in the negative sense, and then 1 being barely nothing. So we'll just wait for those answers to come in. We'll give it a few, maybe 2 more minutes while people type their answers in. Can we have someone on the panel maybe also copy paste that question? Thank you. One more minute and then we'll close. It's interesting to see some of the answers come in. Quite a few are on the 3, 4, 5 end of the spectrum in terms of how COVID-19 has impacted their business. This is assuming there's quite a number of entrepreneurs or they're speaking to their businesses. So, I think it's safe to say that the pandemic has severely affected or highly affected a number of businesses. Just wondering if there's any more answers coming in. Yeah, so there's some who are on the 5 spectrum end of the spectrum, which means that the pandemic has severely and extremely affected their businesses. There's a few ones there, which is very interesting. I suppose for us as well, Naija Startups being an entrepreneur support organization and a virtual hub for SMEs, we are probably on the one side because now everything is virtual. So we've experienced a lot of growth. So I'm one of the outliers. Okay, thank you very much for a brief presentation that I will give in relation to the context that will set for this discussion today. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so one of my favorite cartoonists is Mustafa Abulama. I think he's featured in the Daily Trust newspaper, and I saw this and I thought it was quite interesting because we can't go into this discussion without talking about the elephant in the room. And as we all know, COVID-19 has really taken the whole world by shock because every country is grounded, as you can see from this this cartoon. So I thought that was interesting to share as we sort of go into the presentation. Okay, next slide, please. And I checked the statistics at about 5 a.m. this morning. I didn't check it a few hours before now, but as at 5 a.m., in terms of the statistics from the World Health Organization, we can see where we are in terms of the virus. Globally, first of all, about 6.42 million people with the virus, 383,000 deaths, which is quite severe. And then in Nigeria, of course, statistics say that there's 11,000, just over 11,500 who have caught the virus, and there's been 323 deaths. Interestingly, the numbers of, the percentage of recovery is about maybe 30%, if that, of those who were confirmed to have it. So that gives some hope. And then we look at Lagos and of course other states as well in Nigeria, just to see, what is being, recorded as to the spread. Nonetheless, it is said that, it's spreading exponentially, and it's just interesting to see how something like this, which we can't even see, has, taken the whole world by shock. It's been extreme. Some families have been severely impacted and affected, and of course the economies as well, which I will now go into in my next slide. Okay, so while we had a discussion with the Emmanuel Chapel, or I had a discussion with the team, we were thinking through some of the things that we could focus on as regards this session, because of course it's the state of the future. Having said that, no one knows the future. And there's quite a bit of starting and restarting businesses. if I can imagine, just looking at the statistics there. But then, I think we thought something that would be more important was to show or to speak to how SMEs or businesses or entrepreneurs or even intrapreneurs can stay relevant and sustainable through economic cycles. Of a kind of cycle, however you want to, term that. So this was another cartoon again from my favorite cartoonist. Just looking at our economy. Of course, we know oil, we know the state of things, is trying to stay afloat. So that was another interesting cartoon as a way to set the tone. Okay, next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so a recent report by McKinsey & Co. tagged the path to the next normal, which is an interesting way of phrasing that. We've been hearing the new normal, and they're saying it's the next normal, which is fair and it's justified history, have asked citizens around the world travel and maintain physical distance to preserve the health of families, colleagues, neighbors, friends. And never have we seen job losses spike so fast, nor the threat of economic distress loom so large. In this unprecedented reality of the social and economic order, the next normal. And so that shape this next normal will take. And these stages in terms of when business or society, everyone would have to go through this to be able to stay afloat, essentially. There needs to be some level of creativity if you think about reimagination, and then of course reform, because it's the next normal, things will not be the same. And it's just something to think about as we all transition and navigate these times. Can we have the next slide, please? And so while we cannot predict business post-COVID-19, we can indeed chart a purposeful path to this next normal under these areas, like the McKinsey report suggests. And I think I have the source where you can find that report at the bottom of this this page. And so, they talk about leading with resolve in your business, organizing a response to COVID-19, which is essential for businesses and business owners, mobilizing the C-suite, experimenting with remote education, and even then there's a case of remote work. So I thought it would be good for having some of the panelists on these 4 or 5 things. And I would like for them to speak to them vis-a-vis their own experiences. So Aramide, Ninalowo, with resolve in your business.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, very good. Thanks for inviting me into this. It's an honor being here. So since we're talking about resolve in business and leading with resolve in business, and this is all about COVID, I thought I'd actually start with an example of kind of how we got through how we're getting through the COVID period. So even though I'm relatively new in the medicine scene in Nigeria, I've been very privileged to sit at the table with a lot of hospital leaders and thought leaders in healthcare in this country. And about in March, I was sitting in the office of Dr. Yemi Johnson at First Cardiology Consultants. And he said, Ahmed, we have to think. He said, this COVID thing is coming and we have to get ready. And I said, okay, yeah, sure, we have to get ready. So he said, we have to really get ready. I mean, we have to put money on the table. We have to reconstruct. We have to do a lot of things to basically create a COVID isolation ward. And this is before the government is, basically creating any isolation wards and before anybody else is getting ready. But then I had basically the same meeting with a lot of hospital leaders in Nigeria, and basically no one wanted to have anything to do with COVID. But there was resolve at First Cardiology Consultants, because very early on, they basically said, we have to deal with this. We have to create a situation where we could treat COVID patients and we could also treat our regular patients. So, we started getting ready. We did all the reconstructions. A lot of money was spent buying equipment and training staff. And we got the ICU ready for COVID, and we got another ward ready for COVID, and we left only a few rooms to treat regular patients. So fast forward to now and see what's happening in Lagos. So if you look at it in Lagos now, basically every hospital has had a COVID patient, whether they tell you that or not, right? And they basically all ran away from COVID and said, we don't want to treat COVID patients. But what's happening now is everyone is now chasing their tails, looking at what to do and how to restructure to stay open while we go through the COVID crisis. So where I'm going with this is basically, most leaders with resolve could basically see things coming from a mile away. And in the case of COVID, we had the example of a lot of different countries that were going through the same problems. And even though, we saw a lot of different countries going through the same problems, a lot of people did not recognize the fact that you had to get ready and you basically had to reshape your business basically to fit the situation. So it's very important to basically know that, to basically look at the situations around you, see what's coming in front of you, even if it's a few months ahead, and basically make changes to your business very earlier on to fit that situation so that you're not hanging on your tails when the storm comes.
Thank you for that, Hamid. Thanks very much. And I'll move on to Aisha Bashir to give her own reactions.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Aramide?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I was saying, can we have your own reactions vis-a-vis the points? I'll just put that up again. Organizing a response to COVID-19.
So I think, so with CHAM, we are in our pre-operational phase. So we weren't as severely impacted compared to other food businesses that are already operational. But however, it gave us time to think about how our current business model is structured to withstand and be resilient to a situation such as COVID-19. And I think the first thing is just realizing that your first response really is around the need to survive and making sure that you are conserving cash, because none of us know what the future holds, but we know that we need to be prepared for the tough times ahead. And then planning for the worst and hoping for the best. I think looking at our business, we're not so much exposed to foreign exchange and having to rely on sourcing foreign exchange, but there are a lot of businesses that are import dependent. So they have to plan around how they think about what the Naira is going to look like in the next 3 months, next 6 months, in the next year, and plan around that. And then also for me, one of the things I've been, really spending time thinking about is just how do we design our financial structure to start building our operating cash reserves? So if we have cash reserves, operating cash reserves for the next 3 months, and for some reason we're not able to earn revenue, which a lot of businesses have experienced during this COVID-19 period, what do you need to do? So I think it's very clear to all of us that we need to plan ahead and start thinking about how we can structure our businesses to have cash reserves for the next 6 months, 12 months, even 18 months ahead of time. And then I think, lastly, it's just remembering that one of the key things is when borders are shut down, how do you source for raw material? How do you source for consumables such as your packaging materials? So really rethinking how you source for those things locally is extremely important.
Thank you for that insight. You know, it's it's always good to hear from, you know, people who have actually have had their hands, you know, their elbows in the whole restructuring of their business model and sourcing for funds, looking at their operations, looking at cash. So thanks for the insight, and I'm going to come back to you on some questions there. Can I ask Rolake to speak to mobilizing the C-suite and her experience this period?
Okay, thank you very much, Aramide, and thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. I hope everyone can hear me. So a lot of the work that I do involves advising leadership teams and executive teams about emerging technologies in the energy sector and how they impact on the business. So I've been involved in a lot of sort of business model transformation projects. And I guess the starting point is really around understanding systemic risk. And what do I mean by that? I think COVID-19 has clearly demonstrated that, you know, a single threat can jeopardize an entire complex system. And regardless of what you're working in, you have to because everywhere. Demanding in jet fuel, and consequently there's been a piling and stockpiling of inventories, and globally storage capacity is running out. And so there's a cascading effect. And I think really for senior executives, it's really understanding not just where the global trends are heading, but also, first of all, focusing on the forces of change that have the highest levels of certainty and predictability where your business model is concerned. So your markets, your value proposition, some of the other drivers that impact that, such as the regulatory drivers, the consumer behavior, how your competition is also reacting. That's on the one hand, but then on the other hand, you don't also want to ignore the small micro level changes because they often have an outsized impact on even the bigger plays. So I think in the work I do, I've seen a lot of evolving and emerging trends. For the SMEs, it's really down to things like is the response to that then sourcing locally. Then the development that we then have the local manufacturing capacity or the local piece for raw materials for whatever business that you're in. And understanding what the trade-off is will be critical to making your business decision. And then the second aspect I wanted to briefly talk on is a lot of my work over the last decade has involved raising capital. And now we're seeing global credit lines being squeezed. The competition for credit is tighter. There's a bigger focus from investors and financiers on sustainability. And I'm thinking not just sustainability, I work in the energy space, not just in terms of the global energy transition, but even in terms of the business model. And we often define sustainability as, you know, how you can meet today's needs without jeopardizing the consumption needs of tomorrow. And so whatever type of sector you're in, it's really thinking about, is the sustainability going to come from technologically enabling my business? Is or and finally access funds, because I think it is actually going to be a strong competitive edge for businesses that are still in the position to access finance in this climate, is really around investors wanting to focus more on management teams and your track record. Because nowadays, with newer profiles on investors like venture capitalists and even some of the new generation private equity funds, people often say, well, we're investing really in the management team and the founder, not so much the business. So I think these are some of the things that I hope we can explore as we get into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolake. I think it might have been my internet. I had to switch my internet providers. So I missed some of what you said, but I also think you might need to check it on your end as well, just to make sure that everyone can hear what you're saying. But I did get most of it. And thank you for talking about the macro and then coming, into the micro, and we'll explore some of that in the Q&A. And I'm sure there's quite a few questions for you as well. So can I move to Ayodele Olajiga, please?
Thank you very much, Aramide, and thanks to Emmanuel Chapel for inviting me to be on this panel. I mean, with respect to remote education, I mean, I serve on the board of Teach for Nigeria, and Teach for Nigeria is an organization that that recruits. We deploy them back into underserved schools in Nigeria, across Nigeria, with the sole purpose of eradicating education inequity. So typically, we find ourselves working in schools that are, don't have any resources whatsoever. So when the COVID issue started, the first thing that went through my mind was, we are already working in impossible situations. I mean, how do we move forward? So there was a point where I thought, okay, look, we'll probably have to stop. But what blew my mind was, I saw the fellows, which is these young people, doing things that the level of commitment to trying to get education to these kids was at a level where, as far as they were concerned, COVID or no COVID, these kids had to continue to stay in school. So one example I'll use was a young lady in Lagos who, basically for our entire class, what she did was to purchase, purchase tablets for them. And, so all of these kids had tablets. And then the next question was where, they were supposed to get content from YouTube. And so she got to YouTube and realized that, okay, look, all of these contents are either, Western education focused or some other places. And so what she did was, they then took all of those contents and repurposed them, for in both English that the kids could understand, and also using some of the local languages. And this trend we've seen across the country. We in Ogun State, for instance, they were using radio and TV to teach, and I think that also went into Osun State as well. So we in Teach for Nigeria, what we then realized is that, look, we have to. We don't believe that you'll find you have a situation where we are going to 100% now switch to kids looking at screens to learn. But we think we're in a scenario where all of a sudden you could drive collaboration globally if you start to use technology to connect classrooms, to connect some of these kids in underserved areas, to see what is happening in societies where, or in situations where they seem to have a bit more resources than they do. And you could also use that to drive collaboration between, maybe a school in Elisha and some school somewhere in New York. And so we feel that, remote education is something that has come to stay. I don't believe it's going to replace normal education, because we're human beings and we're built to socialize. So, so the whole idea that, everybody will now be looking at screens to learn, I think we should forget that. But I think, remote education is going to bring a lot of collaboration globally into our classrooms, and even our business. I mean, we've started to try to use that to basically teach, to learn in the company and share information using remote education. So my view is that, one of the benefits of, if you can count it as such, one of the benefits of COVID-19 will be the fact that we would embrace, remote education wholesale. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ayo. From what everyone has said, it's interesting how, there's a consistent theme when it comes to creativity. Yeah, so being able to tackle these solutions with maybe sometimes best practice approaches, but also localizing them. So from Ayo, when it comes to, the Teach for Nigeria teachers, or from Rolake's examples from a macro standpoint, and looking at creativity in ways that we can, explore even capital raising, or Aisha looking at the operational structure and cash and just interesting ways to then optimize their operations in their industries. And of course, Dr. Hamed looking at, you know, the transformation and the turnaround that has had to happen with everything going on now. So clearly, there are opportunities, first of all, because of these inefficiencies. And that brings me to even my own point where we talk about remote working. I've just had to switch my internet to another provider, you know, so there are these inefficiencies and they present opportunities. You know, I was looking at, was it WeWork? Their value has fallen significantly from, I think last year it was about $47 billion. Now it's around 2-point-something billion dollars, given everything that has happened. And then of course this year with the pandemic and all. So when you think about co-working spaces, and to Ayo's point, yes, it's not going to completely go away, but this is the time to now begin to think creatively about being able to capture or even offer value using the current inefficiencies or exploring them a bit more. So I suppose that's a charge to entrepreneurs. I mean, there's no perfect answer, but there are, you know, a ton of opportunities and gaps in our very peculiar environment. So having said that, we'll go into, thank you all again. Having said that, we'll go into the actual Q&A discussion before we take the broader Q&A. So I'll start with Aisha. So Aisha, we've sat through many webinars, you know, this period on COVID-19, on how to navigate business post-COVID, but the truth is no one really knows how to, because no one here has lived through a pandemic. How can small business owners or entrepreneurs generally plan for the unknown? I think you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry about that. So in terms of planning for the unknown, I think the first thing we all have to realize that we have tough times ahead. We're only just starting to see the impact of COVID-19 translate into economic shocks, but it's only going to get worse. So we've seen how the Naira value has changed over the past few months. Luckily for us, the oil price, well, it's two-sided. On one side, the oil price has gone down, which means that if your business is using a lot of diesel and relying on petrol for logistics and transportation, then that may be on your side. But for the economy as a whole, seeing as our earnings are really pegged to the sale of crude oil, the lower the price, the bigger the shock it is for our economy as a whole. So I think, again, as I said previously, scenario is really important. But what enables you to do that scenario building is really understanding the data that comes out of your business. So how well structured are you to collect data on how your business is operating, and how are you making decisions based on actual data as opposed to relying on certain assumptions or relying on what other people are doing, because that just may not work for you. I think it's really important for SMEs as much as possible to design their business processes to capture as much data as they can. It's never too early to do that. We have so much technology at our fingertips to do that. So, you know, when we started collecting data, for example, from farmers, we use an app called Magpie. It's free. And all our teams were able to download it onto their smartphones and collect data in rural areas. It has an offline function, so you didn't need an internet connection, so you could sync it back up when you were back in an area that had a network connection. But and over time, we've managed to build our own mobile app. But the point is that we were able to find solutions that were off the shelf and available to readily get ourselves started. And that really helped us to understand kind of the situations our farmers were in. So I would say technology is really, really important, and it's become more and more accessible and cheaper for people to access. There's so many things you can do with your phone. So I think data is really important for driving decision making.
Thank you, Aisha, for that. And it's interesting that because you mentioned scenario planning and when we think about business and just the future, we don't know the future, but it makes sense to plan per scenario, whether it's like best case or worst case. And like you've said, things are probably going to go down before they go up. But the only way you can do this is through, let's just looking at trends or history, or maybe even not, but just having data, tangible data, to help you then drive those decisions in the future, rather than make emotional decisions like you mentioned, or follow the trend. So thank you for that. I was taking some notes, and I noted the was it magpie that you said, that you mentioned, that was useful. So I'll definitely look into that. Thank you. I'm going to go to Dr. Hamid now. I'm going to ask him with regards to the future of work, unemployment, millennials. So the average millennial, quite a few of us are borderline millennials. So we're speaking for ourselves and, just millennials in general. We're of the microwave generation, right? So we want things here and now, we want them instantly. But when we look at what goes into building a sustainable business, like the great businesses, the greats, like Ford, for example, or even in Nigeria, UAC, it takes longevity, it takes grit. So are, the youth ready to do that hard work, vis-a-vis working? And then we're going to come to talking about unemployment as well. So can you just speak to that, please?
So, I think it's very interesting because now I've kind of lived in two societies. I've lived in America, and then I've lived here in Nigeria. And the perspective of the way I see youth is actually very, very different. And I think the youth are ready to put in hard work. But if you look at everyone that's been really successful and have grown things organically, what sets them apart is the fact that they're ready to put in twice the work, 3 times the work, 4 times the work. I mean, one thing I always tell my employees is, you cannot work harder than me. It's not possible for you to be around me and work harder than me. So for the people that have been very successful, you just have to put in a significant amount of work. But we do have to recognize something. We do live in a society where there's not always a correlation between hard work and success. And there are people, who've worked really, really hard, and you see them and they put in everything they have into getting somewhere. But there's a lot about the society that is not fair. I think I've been very lucky in that, I grew up, I didn't grow up very rich. I grew up in a medium class household. I was thrown to America when I was 16 and I had to find my way, but I've always had a goal that I wanted to practice medicine in Nigeria. So that goal has always been set. So I was in training in 2011. And at that time, I would always come to Nigeria to talk to hospital executives, talk to doctors, network. And I always told people I wanted to do something called interventional radiology. And they always said, what's this interventional radiology stuff, because no one really knew what that was. But I was basically sowing the roots for all of that time for my basically coming back to Nigeria. So people ask me now, why does everybody know you? How is it possible that, you're able to have so much of a network right now? And I said, I've been doing this for a very, very long time. I've been driving around, I've been putting in the work. So I'll make a very simple difference between my work in America and my work here. So my work in America, I'm supplied by the hospital. Everything I need is at a finger's tip. I mean, I just ask for it. It's in my hands and I could use it on a patient. In Nigeria, when I have a case, I am the supply manager. I'm the accountant. I'm everything. And I was that for about a year where I had no employees. It was me. I did all of my own inventory. I did everything. And I was a doctor and I could be making a lot more money sitting in America and not worrying about this. But I had a dream that I wanted to do interventional radiology in Nigeria, and I thought it was possible, even though a lot of people didn't think it was possible. So what I'm saying is, hard work is different from hard work. You have to work extremely, extremely hard, and you have to find a way to set yourself apart from everybody else. A lot of people are going to try things, it's not going to work, but that does not mean it cannot work for you. But again, we live in a society where things are not always fair, but again, you just have to find a way to navigate those windows and find what works for you.
Thanks, Dr. Hamid. That was interesting. it's a perfect case of the entrepreneur where you've done everything. You were bootstrapping when you first got into business, obviously as a doctor. So that's interesting. And like you said, there's hard work versus actual hard work, putting in the work, 4 times the work. And then also, maybe I term it as playing the long game, but you sowed those roots, right? So you built those relationships. It wasn't just about working, it was, building the relationships, the network, having a clear vision and a goal. And I think that's a good takeaway from many of us on this call today. So thank you for that. I will move now to Rolake. In addition to this McKinsey report, I also dug out a report by Mr. Bode Augusto, and it was focusing on our economy after oil and how we should prepare. So as you are in the energy space, in the energy sector, I think you will agree with me that we need to build our economy outside of oil. Yes, oil accounts for 90% of our earnings in Nigeria at the moment, and in fact, it is our handicap. But what can we do to build an economy that is not oil reliant?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. I think if I knew the answer to that question, I probably wouldn't be on this webinar right now. But on a serious note, so I think I'll talk both from the macro perspective and the private sector perspective. I think it's maybe the premise of that question I potentially have a challenge with, because oil is essentially about, or the harnessing of the oil sector for me is 2 things. Obviously, the sustainable use of revenues that come from oil. So that's one dimension of it, is how we're actually investing or saving our oil wealth, which is a full bucket of it. The second part of it is around our dependency on global markets. And whether Nigeria can continue to be this export-driven economy. What the global energy trends have shown us is that we need to invest in local infrastructure networks and invest in building and shoring up our own demand, so that we're consuming more of what we're producing and we're processing and creating value locally. Now, that's obviously going to come if we invest in local manufacturing, if we invest in infrastructure, but the money to do that still needs to come from the sectors that constitute the bulk of our revenue. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. But one thing I will say is that a lot of the businesses that I advise locally are already pivoting in their business models. And I think this is where we need to, as SMEs, local corporates, regional champions, start investing in research and development. A lot of companies don't do this strategically. One of the clients I'm working with now is actually a downstream oil entrepreneur who has commissioned a sort of forecast report that would look at incorporating electric vehicle charging points to their forecourt business. So to their petrol forecourt business. And the idea behind that is, look, we're not going to pivot away from our core operating model, but we want to potentially be positioned to take advantage of future opportunities. So I think that's one of the things that companies can practically do. And like Aisha said, I don't think companies are strategically investing in analytics and data. A lot of people are actually quite reactive. And the reality is, for someone who's worked in the energy industry, I know it's cyclical, right? There are systemic risks everywhere. And so in a sense, the pandemic cycle itself is cyclical. We may be back here again in a decade's time. That's the reality. The final thing I wanted to say really around that is how we think about collaboration across sectors. And I'll give you a very practical example. I was recently putting together a grant proposal for one of my clients in the alternative energy space. They wanted to raise a sum of money from a global development finance institution to electrify some SME businesses across Nigeria who are in the same industry. In this space where, as I mentioned, there's competition for credit, one of the things we introduced at the very last hurdle was to extend the electrification plan to healthcare and hospitals. That was an amazing sell, and it was a thing that actually tipped our proposal into the shortlist. And I think if you're a business in this space, you can't just think in silos, because at the end of the day, your consumer base needs to be economically bankable. So if you're running an agricultural SME, it's beyond, okay, how can I build new markets and new products? The consumers that are buying your products, what about thinking innovatively to address the issues their target market face? So things like consumer finance. A lot of the customers that serve the alternative SMEs I support now are struggling on the consumer credit front. They can't afford the access to energy services that these guys are producing. So my clients are now thinking beyond their business, and they're actually thinking of working with institutions like BOI to come up with consumer credit products that will enable the consumers of their product to thrive through the economic cycle. So, and if we look at that on a grander scale, Nigeria is pretty much like a lot of businesses. First of all, the main source of your revenue, oil, is down. You have the spending plan of 5.2 trillion naira. You want to borrow, but the main asset you want to leverage for borrowing, which is everything from your reserves to your revenue, has actually dwindled. So the question is, what do you do? The most simple thing is that you cut the excesses. You essentially trim your belt. And I think that's all what a lot of us actually need to think of doing. Where are the excesses in my business plan? Are there ways I can eliminate extra costs? Do I have assets in my business right now that I can leverage to access finance? Not necessarily leverage to borrow to fund negative cash flows. But I think we need to start thinking very creatively. And the reality is, for the bigger guys who want to raise funding, you know, the new name of the game is sustainability. And I see it everywhere, whether you're in real estate, it's about thinking about eco-friendliness around how you construct your buildings. And I think those are some of the things that will stand not just Nigeria, but also the private sector. That is a key part of our GDP engine room in thriving through the current cycle.
Thank you, Rolake. I think you at the end you mentioned something about sustainability. If I recall, I think that's the ESG that I keep hearing all the time now. With regard,
the one thing I would say, I think we need to move. I mean, sustainability, we need to think about it in terms of longevity. So sustainability can be how you hire or retain talent, right? What sort of people you're hiring, what skills, even just auditing your current skills base within your organization. Are these the people that are going to take your business and sustain it in 10 years' time? And maybe you need to take hard decisions around that. Do you have human capital that understands technology and digital drivers in our economy? That is a part of sustainability. And then another part of sustainability I'm very, very passionate about is around the diversity and inclusion side of things. But I think that's a whole nother debate. But we need to think broader when we think of sustainability.
Thank you. Thanks for that. You know, the key thing, one of the key things that stuck out was the prioritization of R&D, which is not common in these parts. And then, you know, you mentioned, of course, trimming your belt. As a nation, as a business, I think it's key, and I thank you for bringing that out. You then mentioned, you know, there's the creativity aspect, which has been a running theme, but this collaboration between sectors was an interesting one, you know, where you mentioned the healthcare and energy collaboration case that you had. So that's something for us to think about, because again, you know, to be able to survive and sustain in these times, a high level of creativity must come in. So thank you for those insights, Rolake. I'll now move to Ayo Olajiga. And my question for you is with regards to business and regulation. You run a cashew business where you hire about 400 women and you know, you export cashews as well as, you know, trade them in Nigeria. So as business owners, we know that without a supportive and realistic regulatory environment, business is almost impossible to do in Nigeria. So what can regulators do to better allow businesses operate easily and thrive? And I guess you can speak to some of the work that you're doing vis-a-vis regulation.
Thank you, Aramide. I mean, I think a simple and very fast answer is maybe if all the regulators just shut down, then business will go very well. But obviously, we're not in a world where the regulators will shut down. Okay, so I mean, look, I like to try to think about it in three buckets. You know, the first one is, look, with regards to regulation in Nigeria, systemically, regulators have been designed to be a problem. And I don't know whether it was intentional or not. And I'll give you an example. So yesterday at the factory, we had a visit from the Federal Ministry of Labor to discuss, you know, about labor and the machines and all of that stuff. A very nice team, actually. And they actually came with the regulation itself. They came with a factory act or something like that. And everything they were doing was actually within the law. So all the questions they were asking, all of that stuff was within the law. So there was no problem. So, I mean, they took about 3 hours of our time and they did that. The problem is, that's the same thing NAFDAC is doing, right? It's the same thing Sun is doing, right? It's also the same thing that, if you get to the Ministry of Environment at Kwara State is doing, it's the same thing that NESRA is doing. So all of these nice people have been given a mandate by the law to do it. Everyone thinks, okay, the regulators are bad. Whereas actually, the law enables them to do everything they are doing. And if you're someone that believes in the rule of law, you should actually, the ones that don't visit you, you should probably invite them to come and terrorize you, because they need to do their job. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is, and I don't know which level, I don't know if it's National Assembly, I don't know what it is, but we need to harmonize the regulations. So we can't have, we first of all have to divide what is the federal government going to take care of, what's the state government going to take care of. And once we've divided that, there shouldn't be any overlaps, right? And then if NAFDAC is regulating me, then I shouldn't see anybody from Sun. I don't, but they'll show up and tell you this and this and this and this you need to do. And they're backed by the force of law, because if you don't do it, you get in a lot of trouble. So the first thing is, systemically, we have to redesign the laws to stop regulators from looking very bad, because the law already makes it structurally that if the regulators did their job, I don't think anyone can run their business. Or you just have a department called, regulatory affairs, where you sit and you just receive regulators, maybe on a daily or weekly basis. So that's the first one. And, and the cost of it is, they take your time, you pay fees and all of these things. And, everybody focuses on the fees. But what about the 4 hours of management time that is lost dealing with the regulator and all the other regulators? Now, the second part of it is, our regulators are set up as almost like law enforcement agencies. Like, they're there to enforce the law. You must meet this, you must meet this, you must meet that. But the question I keep asking myself is, why is it that I get more support from the FDA in the US versus NAFDAC in Nigeria? And the reason is very simple. It's NAFDAC is not set up to drive growth, to drive all of these different things. So we're talking about, okay, look, life without oil. I'm one of those who hope the oil doesn't dry up. Yeah, we just need to use it productively. But how are we going to do that if regulators are also not like, why can't a regulator have a target that says, I want Nigeria from next year to be producing 10 times aflatoxin-free peanuts as we produced last year? Why can't that be a target? Why should the target just be, oh, I want to give you a number, I want to register this product, and I want to do factory inspection? And because the target or the objective they have, and the regulator is stuck trying to, they're trying to, make you obey the law. That's what it is, rather than drive growth. So there's a need to change that. Try and understand who all your regulators are, and become friends with your regulators. And I don't mean you now need to go and pack yourself in the office, but there are many ways you can become friendly with the regulator. You can even contribute to policy discussions. You can, some of them are always having events or whatever it is you can attend. You can become part of that system. Oftentimes, when you become part of that system, you move from the bucket of victim to potentially a collaborator. Because when they don't know you, then the first thing is to slam you with a fine when you have done something wrong. when they know you, they oftentimes are probably the ones that we won't tell you, oh, the regulation is about to move in this direction, it's about to change, all of that stuff. So I think, both the business owner and the regulators, we all kind of need a mindset shift in the way we think to be on the platform of the fact that we have looked at the structural way which the law makes it difficult for regulators to intervene with business. Like, for instance, I saw very unrelated. I saw I think it was a PPRA or someone's notice that said that they deregulated the oil sector or deregulated petrol. And all I said to someone was that, well, if they deregulated petrol, then they should disband that agency, because if that agency who was set up to regulate the price of petrol remains, the only thing that happens is they are dormant till this government goes. When the next government arrives, they will be the first to arrive to deliver a paper to the new president on the importance of regulation of regulating the price of petrol. And of course, since they don't need any law, boom, we're back into that regulated regime. So I think as we're changing laws, we should think about the ones that exist that enables all kinds of stuff, so that, because it's business that is paying the price of all these multiple regulators who are enabled by the force of law. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ayo. We interact with tons of entrepreneurs who talk about this point with regards to regulations. So I thought it was very important to bring that topic to the fore. Yes, you can start a business and be all well and good with your operations, but if you don't understand your regulatory environment, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. So thank you for those insights. Being able to, perhaps as a recommendation of us just discussing, explore how regulators can maybe collapse the duplicity of efforts and types of policies, but also, this whole collaborative approach from the regulators and even from the SMEs. And it's a good point you made that we need to also begin to know who they are. I was on a consultation call yesterday with a gentleman who wants to set up a sports platform. And the last point we had after that was, do you know your regulatory environment? You need to know, because then you don't want to be faced with something come 10, 11 months time. So thank you for those insights. Again, it's not about policing. They need to see it as a way to grow our entire economy, build our nation, and it's not through policing. But on the flip side, entrepreneurs and business owners also need to, also be collaborative and make that effort to get to know their regulators, understand the environment, and just collaborate, make suggestions. I mean, it starts from one person, and I'm glad you had an interesting, harmonized or harmonious end to the visit yesterday, Ayo. So thank you for those insights. I'll go back to Aisha now. My question is around agribusiness and even youth at work. So with your work in agriculture in the North, working with young Nigerians, what have you learned in adapting to the changes, the current changes, and this new environment, a new journey to the next normal?
So I think the first point is that we are at our pre-operational phase, so we have spent the past year and a half mobilizing farmers, training them, sensitizing them. And I think the first assumption is that these farmers are youth. And I guess the general definition of youth is people aged between 15 and 34. So I think there is an assumption that there's youth participation in terms of smallholder farming, and that's a big problem because you're seeing more and more people dropping off from a smallholder farmer perspective, and it's the older generation that's kind of keeping it going, and they're struggling to encourage their children to follow the same path because their children don't see the opportunities in farming. They only see hardship. So I think that's very, very difficult. I think the other thing you see from a youth standpoint is that youth of today have not been trained and prepared for the work that needs to be done today. So in terms of the youth that are coming into the workforce, they are not prepared for the work that we expect them to do as employers. So what you're faced with is a huge, huge talent grab. So I think one of the biggest realizations for me moving from Lagos to Abuja is that Lagos is the epicenter of talent in Nigeria. And there is this misconception that that talent is widespread across the country. So most talented youth quickly find their way to Lagos. So if you are operating outside Lagos, you're going to struggle to find talented youth that either want to relocate or that exist in those cities or rural areas you're operating in. So without a doubt, we have to really think about how we build capacity ourselves. We cannot wait for some, force out there to build the educational systems for us, to build capacity, to build skills amongst the upcoming generation, to prepare them to come into our workplaces. We have to do that work ourselves, and it's hard work. It's hard work and it takes a lot of training. So I've had to spend time thinking through how we think about building capacity internally, in terms of our HR function, in terms of skills training and skills development, because that's just the work that we need to do. If you're waiting to find the youth that are, know how to build an Excel model, know how to write letters, have the perfect grammar where you're confident enough to let them send emails to external parties, that doesn't exist, right? You're gonna have to figure out how to get them there. So I think that's really a really important thing that I'd like to kind of share with the audience. We're just not there. We're just not there, but it is our responsibility as the future employers to figure out how we can get them there, because in order for our businesses to be successful, we have to build teams that are able to get us there. And if we can't build those teams that get us there, then our businesses will not be successful.
Very insightful, Aisha. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for highlighting that as much as Lagos is the epicenter of commercial activity, and it's also important to realize or recognize that that's where all the talents kind of just what's the word now, is drawn to. So when you think about other parts of the nation and other regions, how do you begin to build capacity? And you mentioned internal capacity, because for you to even deploy any skills building, you have to look internally and train and build your workforce. So thank you for that. That point about training and preparation is so key. And then this whole perception problem with smallholder farming, I suppose it's something that then this sector would need to look at even a bit more to make it more attractive, or agriculture more attractive to the youth, to, like you said, the 15s to 34s who are no longer interested in smallholder farming. On the flip side, we do say, okay, so is agriculture the future of Nigeria? But if the future of Nigeria, the youth, are not interested, then there's a mismatch. So thank you for those insights, Aisha. I'll move to Dr. Hamid now. You mentioned putting in the work and 4 times the work, building that network. But when you do that as a young person, it doesn't change the fact that we still have unemployment. Not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur. So what can you say in regards to that if you're speaking to young people who are looking to, either find a job or work in entrepreneurship? What would be your advice?
I mean, you are correct. Not all of us are going to start our own businesses, right? If you were to try to start your own business, then you have to find a way to either create value by having a service, or fit yourself in the supply chain in society and make sure that you stand out doing it. Okay, so I'll give an example of the COVID situation. So everyone's making face masks, right? And the most ideal face mask is an N95 face mask, and the whole purpose of the N95 face mask is to have a complete tight seal around your mouth and nose so that there's no air getting in there. So it filters over 95% of microparticles, right? So everyone's making face masks, but there's a particular person my colleague showed me on Instagram. They started making face masks, but they went to make face masks with the intention of making a face mask that's essentially like the N95 mask, which completely seals the airways, and also did not only create an N95 mask, they also made it cool and fashionable, right? So nearly every doctor now is looking to buy that specific face mask because we can't spend money on N95s anymore, right? So you can't only just do things even in the face of a pandemic where everyone's making face masks, you have to stand out. So what are the other options if you don't want to be employed and you cannot be an entrepreneur? Maybe you should collaborate, and I'll use myself as an example. So I was coming to Nigeria, living an high-paying job and coming to Nigeria, and basically I would have to, basically create a hospital or create a cath lab where I would need at least a $3 million investment. So I came to Nigeria and did my survey, and I noticed the cath labs in Lagos only had 10% utility or less than 10% utility. This is in comparison to America, where I have 2 cath labs that I work in, and I have both of them working at 100% utility at all times. So I had to make the decision, do I go invest by myself or do I collaborate? And sometimes all you have to do is go collaborate with people who have already created businesses, but are not using them to actual capacity. So I went in to 2 main places in Lagos and I said, I have this skill set. I would not work for you. That's not possible. I would have my own company, create your own brand within those entities and say, you don't have to pay me a salary. You don't have to pay anything to me. I would come in and make you money and we would have a sharing formula. But very important, my brand stays on top of everything I do. And that's basically what I do now is, I actually don't have my own office. I never built an office. There's no reason to do that, right? I have an office at the hospitals where I work. I see my patients there. Everyone knows that's where I work. I do all of my cases there. And I still have my brand as IRDOC Nigeria. And at the same time, we created the second company we talked about earlier, which is Accurate Teleradiology, which is a radiology company, which is a radiology company that reads studies virtually. So we don't have to be at any hospital in Lagos. I could sit in my house and every study that's done at these hospitals come to my computer and I basically report them. Same thing with my partners. So basically, you just have to continue to think outside the boxes. Even if you cannot build your own thing and you cannot build it big, look at things that have already been built and find gaps in them and see how you could fill those gaps and create incredible value. And if you get to a capacity where you feel like, okay, I am now at a capacity where not that you don't need these people anymore, but you could actually stand on your own, you could then make that investment and move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. It's so interesting how through the entire discussion that we've had, there's certain things that stand out. One is collaboration. You mentioned it, Rolake has mentioned it, Ayo has mentioned it. The topic of creativity, you've all spoken to that. And then of course, vision, because if you're not clear in what you want to do, then the grit, you wouldn't have that grit or resilience. So I think vision is something that we will also bring out. And then that whole sense of ownership and leadership. So Aisha, for example, said, okay, look, I'm not going to wait for anyone to come and help us do this. Let's think through ways that we can do that. And then I think the final point is, don't reinvent the wheel. Look at inefficiencies even and see how you can add value. And so as we continue to see problems, it's not just saying, okay, this is the problem, what do we do? How can we think creatively? Like Dr. Ahmed has also said now with regards to the masks, the N95s, I didn't even know that happened. So that's interesting. And so at this point, I'm going to move into questions because there's quite a few questions coming in from the audience. If you don't mind sending your questions into the Q&A, I forgot to mention that at the start. I will look in the chat box, but I'll start with the Q&A box first. So if you're able to kindly put your questions in the Q&A box. There's a question from someone, they say, how does innovation help us in navigating these times? I think I'll direct that question at Ayo Olajiga, please. How does innovation help us in navigating these times?
Well, I mean, thank you for that. I think, it depends on how you think about the word innovation. I mean, if you're someone who thinks about innovation as, coming up with like, how do we go to space from Lagos? Then, I probably don't have the answer for you. But if you're someone who thinks around innovation is this thing around continuous improvement on how we're constantly looking at whatever it is we're doing, how to get better. and asking the question around everything you do, why are we doing it this way? Go back to the Teach for Nigeria example. What was the problem? The problem was, we don't have any infrastructure to reach the kids. What's the easiest answer? Oh, it's COVID-19. Let's shut down schools. Everybody will absolutely understand if we say we are afraid of dying, we don't want to go to those schools. But what did the young lady do? She said, okay, well, you know what? I've got a network. I'm going to raise money and procure tablets for these kids. Now we've got them on the tablets. Now we're going to customize the content from YouTube to ensure that these kids continue to learn. And then, so innovation for me, at least the way we think, or I think about it, the way we think about our business is constantly challenging, what we're doing, why we're doing it this way. Is there a better way of doing it? Even when there's no crisis. And obviously when there's a crisis, the question then becomes, how do we do it? But to be able to do this thing successfully, there's something you have to have, which is clarity around your objective. What are you trying to do? Because there's no point, for instance, figuring out a way to do something better if, either it doesn't, push your agenda forward, or nobody in your system as a business will pay for that innovation. So that's the way I think about it. I think about it in incremental steps, not the big aha moments.
I'm sorry, Aramide. I really want to quickly just step in and really put all my fingers up and agree with what Aya just said. I think that we spend so much time looking to, the tech industry, Silicon Valley, all these really cool gadgets and new ideas coming out of those places. And we forget about the basics. So much of the basics we cannot do or we don't do in Nigeria, right? And we have to start thinking about the basics and the simple step-by-step processes that we just need to go back and figure out how to do in an efficient and yes, in a resilient manner. I think when I was in business school, people would be like, oh, so what's the innovation and what you're doing with your company? And when I tell them, oh, we're just making fresh dairy available to Nigerians, well, that's not innovative. Well, that doesn't exist in my country right now, right? So I think that we spent, as much as we look to those more developed parts of the world for ideas, how they think about innovation, I think we need to look inside and say, what are the basic things that we just can't do? And I think there are so many opportunities for us to kind of build resilient and successful businesses that way.
Thank you, Aisha and Aya, for those answers. Definitely, there's a lot of innovation that goes into the very simple things, that can go into the very simple things. It's not just tech. There's even funding available for innovation when you're solving for problems that are so simple. So it's not only tech. Thank you, Aisha, for that re-emphasis. Mark Byron says, how can we position our sovereign wealth fund post-COVID to play a bigger role in the economy? I think I'll direct that question at Rolake Akinkugbe-Filani.
Hi, great question. I mean, it's an old challenge that we've had. So Nigeria currently has two things that are meant to resemble a sovereign wealth fund. First, there's the excess crude account, which we might as well just admit now hasn't worked and fulfilled the purpose for which it was set up. And we do have a National Sovereign Investment Authority. And NSI actually has three main fund buckets. So it has a stabilization fund, an infrastructure fund, and a futures fund. And actually, I must give credit to them. They are investing in infrastructure, in real sectors, in healthcare, in power. They are doing their bit. However, one of the things I think that we need to start thinking creatively around is how NSI can perhaps look at the pool of local fund managers, be it P funds that we have in our economy, where they can play, for instance, a limited partner role. I think we have an emerging, vibrant private equity sector, and they're always looking to raise funds. So I think that is one way we can harness that resource that NSI has, because frankly, cannot do everything. Then I also wanted to talk about this whole issue of local pension funds. I'm currently Senior Africa Advisor to the Danish Investment Fund. And the main fund that we deploy in this part of the market, in this part of the world, in West Africa, is something called the SDG Fund. And most of the capital for the SDG Fund actually comes from Danish pension funds. So the government of Denmark has given local pension funds a mandate to invest in emerging markets. And I think we have a huge opportunity here in Nigeria and Africa, because first of all, we're in a democratic sweet spot. Our dependency ratios are low, our labor force is still rising, and we haven't seen the impact of aging that we're seeing in Europe and other places, and that has hit their pension systems. So I think our policymakers need to address whatever obstacles there are currently to pension funds investing in infrastructure, right? I understand that they have a fiduciary responsibility and they need to earn a strong rate of return for broadly risk-averse investors. But I think that is a pool of funds that is yet untapped. We need to do a lot more. So I think there needs to be a strong regulatory framework. There needs to be clarity around how fund managers operate with pension funds locally. We can also borrow a leaf from countries like Qatar and Russia. One of the reasons Russia was able to play the games it did with Saudi over the oil price was because Russia could lean back and a tremendous, I think it's well over 100 billion in savings from its oil and gas sector in its sovereign wealth fund. That was one of the reasons it was able to weather the oil price shock to a large extent, obviously not completely. So I think there's a huge role for them to play in investing in local infrastructure, but we need to widen that pool of potential funds. And I think pension funds should be added to that pot. And again, I would commend the work that NSI is doing, because NSI is making some huge roads in infrastructure. And I know some of the money that was withdrawn from the excess crude account last year did actually go to NSIA. So something must be said of that. I hope that answers the question to a certain extent, but there's no doubt that we clearly need to tap into local financing networks in order to build and adequately support the infrastructure we need for economic development.
Thank you, Rolake. I'll now ask Dr. Hamid this question. As a startup, how do you handle the general lack of industry data available to help you set up your internal structures and processes?
Oh, that's a loaded question for me, since again, for me, what I do is quite unique, right? I brought in a service into the country that did not exist at all, so there was no industry data for me. And I basically had to do the groundwork myself, which means I had to be a foot soldier to go talk to a bunch of folks to see what the possible interest was, you know, in this new field of medicine that wasn't available here. And if there's no industry data, you just basically have to do the groundwork. I think it's that simple. You have to get ground and find the information yourself.
Agree, totally agree. Thank you for that. And I'll ask a question from Moses Odeli. COVID-19 was a bolt from the blue. In Nigeria, we've got uncertainties around power, exchange rate, counterfeiting, logistics, etc. How do we build a robust uncertainty management plan into the business planning process? I will ask this question to Ayodele Olajiga. He's smiling because he knows I was going to ask him. You're on mute though.
Oh dear. So I mean, it's repeat the question again. I mean, I think after the second one I got lost. How do you build what?
Yes. So how do we build a robust uncertainty management plan into the business planning process? Which is a good question for these times that we're in. Have we lost you, Ayo? Okay, well, we can come back to that question.
Look, so I think, I mean, there's the class, your risk analysis, your risk, there's all of that stuff that can you hear me, or because you can't? So I think there's a lot to be said for all the, the stuff you learn to do around the scenario planning, the risk analysis, all of that stuff, and you have to do all of those things. But I think anyone on the panel who's doing business, or anyone listening who's doing business in Nigeria, knows that there's another bucket called the unknown. And that unknown oftentimes is a lot, is a lot bigger than the known, which is you don't know, for instance, where you're going to get a call from somewhere saying somebody, in our case, I remember one time we got a call saying immigration had locked the factory. And I thought, immigration? I was in, I was trying to figure out why would immigration be in our factory. But it's a very long story. He ended up interrupting production by 2 days. That adds costs to your system. There's, things like electricity, all of those things, I think you can cost them. You can dimension them and figure out what is the worst case scenario. What I currently know is that, 2 or 3 things I think people should do is, one, is that when you start your business, if it's possible to stay away from debt, I probably will stay away from it, and I will be more loaded with equity. Just because Nigeria has this way of just taking quietly, and before you know it, there's nothing left in there. So if what they're taking from you is from equity, at least you don't have to worry about interest. The second thing is you have to invest in the culture of gathering data. So even though there's no industry data available, our businesses on an hourly or daily basis is generating a lot of data. One of the things I realized was that sometimes you spend money on the same thing over and over again simply because you are not collecting data, so you are not seeing the trend, or you're not seeing what is happening. The last thing I would say, is, we're all, as entrepreneurs, we'll expect the best. We all think we have the best plan. We all think it's going to work. But I think we should spend a bit more time in, what if everything just goes to hell? What am I going to do? Because a lot of people don't do that, because, of course, why were you going to start a business if you expect everything to go to hell? That kind of stuff. You can do, but you have to spend as much time in that bucket as you spend in if ShopRite, if your sales in ShopRite triples or doubles or whatever it is, because it is in those dark moments, or not dark moments, those dark conversations, you start to identify some of the risks, that faces your business. And I think for me, just having that enough capital, data, thinking, all of the good stuff that the business people will tell you. And then in Nigeria is, I'm not saying don't be positive, but I'm just saying that in Nigeria we can sometimes be too, I don't know if there's a word like too positive, but we can be so much in the positive mind space that we don't go into that. What happens if tomorrow? I think this one happened. I don't know if anyone ever asked the question, what happened to UAC Foods when traffic stopped? Because that's where they sell all the gala, right? I don't know if anyone asked that question, and I don't know. They are friends of mine, so I'm not going to say anything about what they did. But that stuff in which has told us that they can bucket to, do your analysis, where people wouldn't owe anybody any money. If you owe people money, you are writing letters, you owe money. You'll be empathetic towards your employees, but you are not going to have a heart attack because you couldn't pay salaries. But if there's something around, you can't pay your debts, and they're taking you to court or wherever they're taking you to, it's a different kind of reaction. Look, it's a very, you've thrown me a hospital pass, but it's a very difficult question, but those are my thoughts. I'm sure other people would have something else to say.
Thanks, Aya. I think you've done well in answering that question. We have quite a few more questions. We'll only be able to take 2 more, and then we have to move into wrap up and closing. But I will say that you're welcome to email your questions, and we will be able to share email addresses through Emmanuel Chapel. So there's a question to Aisha. What can bring youth to be interested in agriculture, particularly outside Lagos? Is it recreation, social challenges? This is from Folahan Olorudi.
I think you have to show them where the money is, right? At the end of the day, everybody wants to have a prosperous future. So you have to figure out how to show them where the money is. And for us, it's we're looking at, working with smallholder farmers, and it's we're a social enterprise, but we're not trying to move smallholder farmers from earning, I don't know, the metric of like $2 a day to $3 a day, which is but what we're trying to do is build kind of smallholder farmers and get them to the point where they are they're thinking of their farming as a business, not as a not focusing on it just for subsistence. So how do we get them to kind of build and improve their productivity so they are earning a significant amount of money from what they do? How do you provide them with training and access to technology? How do you get them bank accounts? Those kinds of things. I think you have to show the youth where the money is and where the opportunities are in order to attract them to go into agriculture and farming.
Thank you, Aisha. And then one last question, again to Ayo. Osarisin Gobadia says, how do we account for our time spent on regulators and tax masters?
Why am I getting off the hospital parties? Well, look, I mean, I think with respect to regulators, the way I think about it is, I think about it the same way a CEO spends their time networking with business people, the financiers, and all of those people. If you start to see the regulators as part of your ecosystem as very crucial to the success of your business, you realize that you actually need to spend a bit of time, with them at the most senior level as well. So it's not, don't go and delegate it to somebody in your business that you call a clerk, because what you do not realize is that all of these agencies are also interacting with, the UN, the World Bank, the USAID, all of these people with different grants and funds on research or to support your business and stuff. So oftentimes, because we're very terrified of the law enforcement part of their role, and we try to stay away and we hope they don't remember us, we also then miss out on all the different things that are the support that is coming to them. Because, for instance, if one agency that is very, very that's been very helpful to our business is Nigerian Export Promotion Council, led by Mr. Olo, where everyone that wants to support Nigeria in terms of export is going there first. They're not going to come to you directly. They're going to go to NEPC. So if you are the one that the type that doesn't spend any time with regulators, don't interact with them, I mean, how would they know you exist? Because the only time they know about your company is when the enforcement unit is looking for you. And obviously when they're discussing grants, the enforcement unit is not where it goes. It probably starts from the DG or wherever it is. So I would see engaging with regulators. I would advise you treat it as an investment rather than, and it's hard because some regulators, I don't know how you can invest, for instance, in customs, but some regulators are difficult to invest in, but we must still try, because ultimately, if they're part of your network, they make your life easy. If they're not, potentially makes your life difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayodele, and thank you everyone for asking those questions. I know there are some questions still coming through the chat, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Some of our panelists will answer some of your questions in the chat box as we close. And so to close, we have a special guest with us, and I'll introduce her. She's the co-founder of Sahel Consulting and serves as its managing partner. She has 23 years of experience in international development, and through her work with Sahel, has shaped agriculture, strategy, and policy in West Africa for a range of clients in the public, private, and non-profit sectors. Ndidi Okonkwo-Enwuneli, MFR, just gave the Harvard commencement address was it a few days ago or a week ago, with her husband. So it's amazing to have her on this panel to give her, final remarks, having listened through all the discussions and, answers and insights from the panelists. Hello, Ndidi. The floor is yours.
Great to be on this panel, and thank you to Emmanuel Chapel and to the excellent panelists and great moderator Aramide. Well done. I know many of the panelists, and I'm honored to speak after all of them. I have to say, I agree and I echo a lot of their sentiments, but I'm an eternal optimist. And I believe what COVID-19 is for Nigeria is actually a gift. I know many of us don't see it as a gift right now, especially the entrepreneurs who said they're really suffering. But I think especially for those of us in the real sector, agriculture obviously is one of those sectors. If you're in education, if you're in health, this is your opportunity. I was speaking on a webinar earlier today, and I said, many of us are not going to be sending our kids back abroad after COVID-19, right? That's an opportunity for those in the education sector. Those of us who ordinarily would have gone for annual checkups will have to do it in Nigeria. That's a great opportunity for Hamid and all the other people in the health sector. For me, in the agriculture sector, I have to tell you that this has been a wake-up call for so many policymakers and partners. And when we think about the opportunities in the agriculture sector, it's not just because of the restrictions in trade globally, but also because of the devaluation of the Naira and the fact that so many of us who loved imported products are having to source locally. If your spices were imported, now you're buying Ace Food spices, right? If you preferred the cashew that was imported, now you're buying Ayo's cashew because this is your choice and you can afford it. So those of us who have invested in backward integration and have built a supply chain will benefit. I'm writing a book, a follow-on to my first book on social innovation. And this one is really on African entrepreneurs scaling so that we can feed ourselves and the world. And over the last year, I've been interviewing entrepreneurs all over the continent. And I have to tell you, my model for success, which I'll just share, wraps up everything people have said. So the business model for scaling and success in the ag sector, which is applicable to every sector, has 7 dimensions. The first is your business model has to be demand-driven with measurable impact. Now, if it's not demand-driven with measurable value addition and measurable impact, whether pre-COVID or COVID, post-COVID, you will not survive. So you really have to look and critically examine what your product or service is and ensure that it's demand-driven. The second piece is that it has to be cost-effective. Purchasing power has declined dramatically in Nigeria and globally. So if your product is not cost-effective, and the concept of luxury products today in our context are not going to fly. It has to be cost-effective. Your business has to be driven by efficient systems and structures to remove fat. And this is an opportunity for you to do that. The third is that you have to shape the ecosystem. I enjoyed listening to Ayo, and I completely agree with him. For those of us who've said, I don't want to deal with government. No, I don't want to join any associations. I'm just doing my thing. That has to end. You need to be part of an association. In our context, it's the Manufacturers Association, it's NABG, it's NESG, it's whatever it is. You need to partner with others to amplify your voice. And you should be involved in shaping the policies that define the environment in which you work. And if you're not, you're going to pay the price ultimately. The fourth component is that it has to tell a story, and you have to be able to build a brand. I had heard about Aisha before this conversation because even pre-operational, she's already building a brand, right? And that's a challenge to many of us who say, oh, I'm just going to let my work speak for me. Those days are gone. My husband and I used to be a big believer in let our work speak for us. But we realized you have to actually amplify your voice and tell your story, because that story is what is compelling. And many of us in this part of the world are not good at telling our story. And other people have less of an impact and they're being celebrated. So I think many of us have to start packaging ourselves. We call it packaging. Nigerians can package themselves in terms of their physical appearance. How many of us have learned how to package our businesses and package our business models and package ideas? The fifth is that it has to be resilient to shocks. And I already had this in my book before COVID-19, because COVID-19 is just one shock, but there are going to be so many other shocks. Climate change is a shock that we deal with in agriculture all the time, with flooding and drought and late rains. But there are other shocks and pandemics that are going to be coming. So if you have not inbuilt into your DNA resilience and agility, forget it. You have to think through scenario planning from day one. You have to have insurance. Somebody posted something about insurance. That is absolutely critical. And many of us say, oh, God will help me. God helps you, but he's given you wisdom to plan and navigate effectively and put in place systems and structures to ensure that you work. And then finally, you have to leverage technology. And if COVID-19 has shown us anything, is that a business that does not leverage technology is dead. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, there's a technology dimension in how you interact with your suppliers, your customers, your own business operations, not only increasing your efficiency and effectiveness, but in terms of leveraging your reach. And I tell you that this COVID-19, we have pivoted in so many ways. We had launched a digital business called nourishingafrica.com, which is a home for, we envisaged it as a home for 1 million entrepreneurs, which is a combination of DevX, LinkedIn, and Facebook for ag entrepreneurs, because we knew that there was a data asymmetry. People couldn't find funding. And so we started this around September when I was writing the book. And this COVID period has just shown us how important that type of business is. And I'll challenge all of you in every sector you're in, think about leveraging data and putting it out there for people to be able to benefit from. For those of you who are interested in agriculture, it's a free resource. Get on Nourishing Africa, upload your profile. You're going to see all the funders. Now, COVID-19 has brought out funders from the woodwork, and Nourishing Africa is going to be giving grants to entrepreneurs in the next few weeks who want to revive their businesses. Because funders have approached us and said, can you partner with us to give grants to help entrepreneurs revive their business in ag and food? And we're seeing that in energy. I'm sure that Rolake has seen that. We're seeing that in almost every single sector where funders realize that they need to support SMEs as the bedrock of society. So just to round up, I think I'm really excited. I'm excited because we have to, this is a chance, this is a gift that God has given us. We had fragile ecosystems across the board. And if we don't fix them and collaborate to fix them, then we have to take the blame fully for our unwillingness to do the right thing at this time. The rest of the world is hurting, so nobody is coming to our aid, but it's time for us to look internally and really say, how can we work within our cities, within our states, and nationally to address this? I mean, for the first time, I'm working with WFP, Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, NESG, to look at data for vulnerable, because all of us have been feeding the vulnerable people. Ace Foods has been feeding. I know Emmanuel Chapel has been feeding. But really, do we have the data? Do we know where they're needed the most? And we're seeing collaborations come out of the woodwork. I'm just excited that even having a database on vulnerability in Nigeria will come out of this. So I celebrate all of you entrepreneurs on the line, and I think that this is an opportunity for us to do more together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Njidi. Thank you for those dimensions. I was just scribbling aggressively just to capture everything, but I'm sure there's a replay. Thank you. And I want to use this opportunity to say thank you to Emmanuel Chapel again for hosting this. Thanks to all our panelists. It's been a great, insightful discussion. And thank you to all our attendees. If there's any questions, please feel free to connect with Emmanuel Chapel, and then they can share the questions with us so that we can respond. And to this end, I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.